So when I started, I remember thinking when the people were celebrating 30 years, dang, they're old. I know, when you're 20, you get to think that, right? Well, now I'm one of them. So it's been a great career. It's been a great place to work. We're going to do something a little bit different today because I try to always put the presentation around what's happening. And sometimes I come and there's not a lot happening in land and interest rates, and we don't spend a lot of time talking about that. There's a lot going on there. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about interest rates and land values, and a little bit about what's going on in agriculture, what producers, what's on top of your mind that we hear from our customers. And one of the things that I think should be more on top of your mind, and we're not going to talk about financials today completely. I got something else that I think is should be more on top of your mind than just that. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I already gave my agenda. A look back. I want to give you a look back at the last number of years, and the reason is because it really sets the stage of why are we where we're at today, and what happened to get us here. So if we think about this, in 2020, we obviously had the pandemic. I know we don't want to remember it. We want to forget it. And actually, it's kind of the forgotten year. Does anybody have those moments where they're like, gosh, what happened that year? I don't really remember. Because we want to forget. But there was a lot of things that happened in agriculture, into your operations. And it's all right up here. I mean, remember the packing plant situation? Another moment we want to forget. We weren't sure we were going to be able to move our livestock through the packing processes. There were backlog, demand shifts. People weren't able to go to work with the packing plants, and so how will we get our processing done? The other thing that was going on was grain. Ethanol production went cut in half. Livestock, the long-term view was not looking good. Prices were collapsing. At the beginning, remember at 2020. And so what happened? We had food security issues for the first time that we were really dealing with. We always talked about it, but did we really know that was actually going to happen? Potential environment catastrophes and potential long-term demand destruction. There was a lot going on. But it truly started setting the stage of how we are where we're at today. And then 2021, grain production had spent 6 years to reconcile the reality of low commodity prices, and we always deal with these volatilities in trade and weather. Those are the things that aren't going to go away. But all of a sudden we started moving into stronger prices and high volatility. And the speaker that we had before, she was talking a little bit about the high prices, but all of our revenue, but our expenses are also going up higher. So really what you want to focus on is margin. Where is your margin at? And she touched on it a little bit. So I wanted to give you that background reminder because it helps us understand what's going on with interest rates. And where are they going? How far are they going? When's this going to stop? So if you look at the history here, this is 2015, and it goes all the way through till July. And this is what Prime did. It was where it was at the end of every year. And what's interesting here, it was at 350, and we jumped up to 450, 550. Then the pandemic happened, and then prices started dropping. Interest rates started dropping. And where are we going? We're back to about where we were in 2017. So you've seen them go up, then you've seen them start going down because what was happening with our economy, of what was happening with the pandemic, and now we're seeing that all go back up again. Then the U.S. Treasury here, this thing gets a little bit more crazy because Prime is our short-term indication of what's happening with interest rates. So if you have an operating note, it's on a variable rate, it's adjusting all the time, it's moving. The U.S. Treasury we use to give us an index of where long-term rates are at or where they're going. And so this U.S. Treasury is going to be more of an indication of fixed rates. Now that is not where fixed interest rates are at. That's just where the market's at for long-term rates. So go back to 2015. They were at 222 on December 2015, and today we're at 260. I don't have the May, because I have May and July, because I want to show you what's actually happening just in the last 6 months. We'll get to that in a moment here. But if you look at the U.S. Treasury, 222, where it's traveled, it was below 1, December of 2020, and then it started going back up in 2021, and today where we're sitting is at 260. So what does that mean? That means your long-term fixed real estate loans, if you were to lock in a loan back in 2015, it would cost roughly about what it's going to cost on an interest rate today, a little bit more even today. So we'll get a little bit more into details on that. So I want to give you that history because it's jumping all over the place, right? What is going on? So as we take a look at this just gives you a trend of the U.S. Treasury. If I can find my name. There it is. And it's the red is the 10-year. This, I call it, purple is 20-year, and then this, the 10-year Treasury. So this 10-year and 20-year is actually what our rates were doing, what Farm Credit's rates were doing in that time period. And this is going back only a year. And look at that movement in a year's time. And so this starts in February. And just look at the jumping around interest rates have been doing. And that's the 10-year Treasury I put in there because that's what's happening with the economy. That's what's happening with the interest rate market. That's what's happening with our funds. And so that impacts long-term fixed rates that we can offer to you as customers. And that is jumping all over the place. So what you're being quoted today may change tomorrow really fast. And it may have some pretty good movement on it. And the reason is because the economy is really unsettled on long-term view of where we're going. What's this recession thing? What's inflation? What's all those things that are happening? Now the short term, we know what's happening. The Fed has risen twice this year, and both times they went up 75 basis points. So if you were on a variable interest rate, it went up 1.5% in the last 6 months. These fixed rates haven't quite went as much, but sometimes they went more, because here in June they were at the peak, and now they're kind of softening back down again. And so what does that mean to me as a producer? Well, those are still good fixed rates. Remember, I started with 30 years is a long time to be in this business. From this seat in the ballpark, when I started, and I know some of you have heard me say this before, because you've heard me speak before, when I started 30 years ago, there was 2 interest rates we quoted, 8 and 9. And it was whether you wanted a real estate loan or you wanted an operating note. That was 1992. And that stayed in that game probably for 4 or 5 years. We just kept quoting the same interest rates. My job was pretty easy. You want 8, you want 9, you want a variable rate, you want an operating note, you want a real estate loan. It has not been easy this last 6 months because it's moving so much, and we're trying to help you understand what's happening with the market. Because sometimes when you see that kind of jumping around like that, things are going up, what's really going on here? And you want to make sure, is that an indication of the market, or is that an indication of what the lender's doing? Because guess what's happening with everything else you're buying? Going up. I was going to Omaha on Tuesday. I don't eat McDonald's a lot, but I was in a hurry. I needed something before I ran into the office in Omaha, so I went through McDonald's. I about fell, I honestly fell over. The poor woman at the counter, I said, I would like a cheeseburger. And she said to me, anybody got a guess of what the price was of the cheeseburger? No, not quite that high. It was just a plain cheeseburger down. $3.28. And I said, I'm sorry, I just wanted a cheeseburger. Who's the idiot? I was. She's looking at me like, I know, I really hate charging you that price, but that's what it is. I'm like, I'm sure 6 months ago I paid like $1.99. And 12 months ago, it was on the dollar menu for $1.07 because 7 cents was what the local tax was. What is going on? And you want $3.28 for this cheeseburger, and I'm not even sure it's going to be that good. And she's like, yeah, I do. I just really hate to charge that price, but yeah, that's what it is. I was floored. You know how many people I've told that story to, and they're like, Angie, where have you been? I was on vacation last week. I can tell you, I was in North Carolina. Things were a little cheaper there. Don't ask me why. High traveling, high tourist area. I was surprised at how cheap it was down there. Everywhere you went, gas was $3.50. Everywhere you went. And I kept saying to my husband, can you fill it up enough so we can take a bunch home? Wasn't even our car, we rented it. So, I mean, everything's going up. Interest rates are going up too, so we're trying to figure out how does this impact us and our cash flows and what we're going to do. So let me give you the short-term view on this. The Federal Reserve, I said, went up 1.5% in the last 6 months. Their prediction for, and I believe I missed the date on here, but they meet again in September. 59% likelihood that they will go up 50 basis points in September. There's a 41% likelihood that they will go up 75. So and what they're doing is they're watching the market, they're watching the consumer index, they're watching unemployment, and they're trying to figure out where do we need to move rates. And so they have this predictability that they put out that they say this is what we're likely to do. So you're likely to see another increase. But I have good news. Because last year, I looked at my presentation I did last year here. I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to explain this one. Last year I stood here and I told you that the Fed was likely not to move interest rates until the end of 2022. That was what the prediction was a year ago. So, I don't know how accurate these predictions are. I'm just telling you what the market's saying. I'm just telling you what the Feds are telling us. But they told us a year ago at this time that they were likely not to move until the end of 2022. They've already moved twice. They moved 1.5, and they are predicting at a high probability that they will move at least 50 basis points in September. So, it is going up. Here's the good news. They are predicting, so if I'm back next year, let's hope this is true. Somebody can write this down. They're predicting that they will lower interest rates before end of 2023. And the reason why they're saying that is because they're watching indications in the market with the consumer price index, unemployment. So basically, are we spending money? Are we saving money? What are we doing that's driving our markets? And they're saying by what we see, there's indications that we need to go up again, get things to settle out, and then we hope by the end of next year we'll be going down. So that's the positive, right? We got to get through this. So you might see an increase. But again, remember 8, 9, 30 years ago, these are still really good interest rates. So that's the short-term interest rate. That's your variable interest rate. The long-term interest rate, the market is so volatile that nobody wants to predict where they're going. So today, roughly, I'm going to say a range of 5 to 7%, depending on what interest rate you would pick for a real estate loan. We have 135 different ways that we can price a real estate loan. Fixed, variable, ARM, temporary fixed, which we call IFRs, which basically means you fix it for a short period of time. So 135 different ways you can price a loan. So it's probably in that range of 5 to 7%. A year ago, we would have been pricing that at probably about 1 to 1.5 lower, and we have no indication of where it's going. So 5 to 7.5% is a lot better than 8 or 9, right? So it's still good. Now, what do you have a tendency to do when the variable rate's going up? So my husband and I have a loan, and he's seen, we did split it up. One loan, and we split it up. We put a little bit on variable, we put a little bit on fixed when we did it years ago. He is seeing the variable rate notices coming home, just like you. Guess what he's thinking, just like what you're thinking. What are you thinking when you see variable rates going up? well, he should be thinking that. He's thinking to pay it off. Like, where do you want to do that? How do you want to do that? That's a great idea, or not. So that is what your tendency to do is you're going to try to pay it off. Now, I'll tell you in a minute why you want to try to pay it off, because some of you are flushed in cash. And how do we know that? Because we track operating borrowings, like how much you're borrowing and you're operating from a whole portfolio standpoint. You're not borrowing as much right now in your operating notes. You're a little bit more flushed, which is good. You're not feeling that way, right? But you are, because you aren't borrowing as much operating. You're borrowing about 35% of what your commitment is on whole from a portfolio standpoint, versus historically at this time, we would have seen it more like 55 to 60%. So we're a little cash flush. We might not be feeling like that because costs are going up, right? But we're getting the benefit of the income that we were able to generate last year. It's carrying us over. So when that happens, you think, well, I'm gonna prepay debt. Not gonna pay it off, but I'm gonna prepay it. Maybe not the right thing to do. Still good interest rates. You may want to stay in for the long haul. And if you do have attractive real estates that are fixed, don't pay those off. Because again, you don't know where this is going. So if you had the benefit over the last 5 to 7 years that you have a real estate loan that has a 3, 4, or 5 in it, I probably wouldn't pay that off. Because if this thing continues to go, you may never borrow money this cheap again. So take it back 30 years, 8, 9. In that 30 years, interest rates have done nothing but really kind of go down. Someday will it turn and we'll see 30 years of it go up. So that's why we would say, don't prepay your debt. And you're not doing that because you're not using the operating to do it, which is good. The other thing, what you were getting at, is fix it. If you have anything that's at variable that you can lock in and fix, you still have opportunity to do that. Out of the consumer price index and unemployment. I don't have the unemployment, but all these things are up. Energy, food, shelter, everything is costing more money. I don't need to tell you that. You know that. You're seeing that. You're experiencing that. So some key takeaways here. Expect the labor market to remain tight in 2022 and into 2023. Moving forward, the Fed's action will largely depend on inflation reports starting in July. So depending on what happens to the consumer price index, if we continue to spend a lot of money. And why are we spending a lot of money? Because we had a whole year of being locked up, not being able to spend any money. And now we're all doubling down and spending as much as we can. We'll settle back out. Everything goes in cycles. But not necessarily you in the room, but in society, that is what's happening. Tight monetary policy is having a direct, bearish impact throughout the U.S. economy, as well as commodity markets as demand begins to pull back. And then lastly, with the Fed increasing interest rates, the U.S. dollar was at a 20-year high and reached parity with the euro in July. A stronger dollar makes U.S. products more expensive for foreigners to buy. So that is a 20-year high that we've seen. And a lot of that is all coming off of why I took you back to the history. So much of that has driven what's happening in our economy and where we're at. Now, who's to say that wouldn't have happened 2 years ago anyhow? If we didn't have a pandemic, would we be still in the same place? Maybe. Who knows? But some of that got escalated a little bit because of where we've been. All right, before I move to land values, any questions on interest rates? Economy, inflation, anything like that?
There's one over here.
Yes?
It used to be that your short-term rates and long-term rates kind of moved simultaneously, and we're not seeing that anymore. Any ideas on that?
Yes. So the question is, it used to be that we would see short-term rates and long-term rates move simultaneously, like flow together. And we're not seeing that. And that's because the short term, we're reacting to the economy short term, meaning that we're raising interest rates. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates because of what they're seeing happen now. But the long-term markets, so the bonds and stocks, and everybody's a little confused and unsure. And so that's why we're seeing long-term just jumping around and it's not really sure. It's confused. It doesn't know where it wants to land. It doesn't know where it wants to go because it doesn't know where the economy is going for sure. And it's a little bit of, do we really want to admit we're in a recession or are we not in a recession? And so we're just settling in, trying to figure it out, and that's why you're seeing them jump all over on the long-term side. That make sense? Kind of?
The world doesn't make sense.
Well, that's why I'm here to help. All right, anything else? Okay, land values. Another thing that's jumping all over the place. Tell you what, it's getting crazy. So this is where we get our benchmarks. If you've seen this before, basically we have 70 full-time appraisers that do these benchmarks. We have 71 of them. In Iowa, I believe there's 21 benchmarks. What does benchmarks mean? That means they are farms that we appraise every 6 months, the same farm, exact same ground, every 6 months to get an indication of where the market's at. And we do that based off of also what's happening in the market, what's being sold, what the value of land is, and so we update them every 6 months. They're all across the whole state of Iowa. And so if you live in a certain area and you're buying a farm, it'll usually be compared to a benchmark that we're continually updating. And if you bought another farm, it would be to the same benchmark because they're geographically in the same area. Does that make sense? Okay, so what's going on with land prices? Holy cow. So it's not always what you think. So who wants to take a guess? Well, let me say it a different way. When we hear these really high land prices, 20,000 an acre, 25,000 an acre, who's heard those? What do you think? Well, okay, crazy. But you think that that's happening everywhere, right? No, it's not happening. We only hear about the exciting stuff that people want to talk about at coffee shop, right? Or at the barber shop, or at the salon, or wherever we're getting our information. That's the ones that people want to talk about. I'll show you in a little bit here that there's not that many of those sales that actually happen, but that's the ones we talk about. So the average land price in Iowa is $13,000. It's went up 24.5% in the same quarter a year ago. The number of public land auctions is up 53% higher than the same time period a year ago. So we're selling land public auction. While public auction activity is above normal, total crop land sales are actually down. I did have a slide in here and I pulled it out, but it was showing how many appraisals that have been done in the last year, and the numbers are dramatically down. Like from 550 appraisals a month down to 325. Because it's just not as much moving. Now, that is an indication sometimes why you will see land value go up. It's just because there's not enough in the market. It's the whole supply and demand thing. Interest rates are still attractive, so that is also helping. And we'll get into the income thing here in a couple slides, but the income thing is also driving some of this. A percent of total sales, public auction account for nearly 6% of all sales, while realtors, private sales, and sealed bids have all decreased. I found that really interesting because a year ago, public auctions were going down, and the privates and the sealed bids and more like if you had to know somebody to know some ground was selling was happening, and then all of a sudden it just flipped and everything started to go public again. So why do you think that is? What's that? Stock market changes? Anybody else have a guess?
People think they can get more at auction.
I'm sorry, Beth, you?
People think they can get more at the auction than they would get from
People think they can get more from the auction. Yep. So if you wanted to sell land, would you want to put a whole bunch of bidders in a room and see if they could get it to go up? If you were the seller, that might be a motivation. Any other ideas?
Do technological changes.
Go ahead.
Do technological changes, so being able to like online.
Due to technology changes. Yes, I got an interesting story on that. Anyone else?
Agents don't necessarily, it's sort of a moving target of how much the land is worth, so it's harder to just set the price and let the market decide.
Right. It's kind of the market driver.